A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. Carl Jung. Have you ever noticed something so clear, so painfully obvious to you, yet everyone else seemed blind to it? And when you tried to speak about it, you were met with silence, resistance, or worse, subtle rejection? That is not just frustrating, it is isolating. And it is one of the quiet dangers of seeing what others don't. Carl Jung understood that awareness comes at a cost. The deeper you go into your own psyche, the more you start seeing through the masks people wear, the lies society tells, and the emotional games that pass for normal. You begin to notice things others avoid, patterns of pain, inherited trauma, collective denial. And once you see them, you cannot unsee them. But this clarity does not always feel like a gift. It can feel like exile, because the world is built to reward those who go along with the script. The one who questions it, who lives outside of it, is often treated as the problem. Your insight becomes a disruption. Your honesty becomes discomfort. You might be labeled intense, negative, or too sensitive, not because you are wrong, but because your presence challenges the unspoken rules. This is not about superiority. It is about psychological reality. When you begin to wake up in a sleeping world, you are not always met with curiosity. More often, you are met with quiet resistance. And that is where the real story begins. Number 1. To see what others don't is not a gift at first, it's an exile. It might look like insight from the outside, but on the inside it feels more like being pushed out into the cold. You're not celebrated for what you notice. You're often quietly avoided. What people don't tell you is that when your perspective shifts, you don't just lose your connection with others, you lose your connection with your old self. Think of someone who wakes up to the toxicity in a culture they were raised in. Let's say they grew up in a family where no one talked about emotions and silence was seen as strength. One day they begin to understand that this silence isn't strength at all. It's fear. It's generational pain. They begin to speak up, to question, to challenge. And suddenly they're not just the black sheep. They're the outsider. Not because they want to be, but because once they've seen the dysfunction, they can't unsee it. And what used to feel like home now feels like a trap. This is the exile Jung warned about. It's not just about being different. It's about the painful space between what you now know and what others still refuse to see. That space is filled with doubt, silence, and sometimes even guilt. You may start asking yourself if you've gone too far, if you're being dramatic, if maybe, just maybe, ignorance was easier. But here's the catch. Once you start seeing clearly, comfort becomes unbearable. Small talk becomes exhausting. Pretending feels like lying. You're no longer able to find peace in the places where you used to hide. And that's where the real shift begins. Not when you see the truth, but when the truth makes you outgrow your old life. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the path to becoming whole. But wholeness doesn't feel like a warm hug at first. It feels like being cracked open. It feels like grief. And yet, this exile is necessary, because in losing your old self, you make room for something new, something real. So no, seeing what others don't isn't glamorous, it's costly. But the cost is often the beginning of real freedom. And once you've tasted that, there's no going back. Number 2. When you see beyond the collective illusion, you threaten the equilibrium of those still trapped within it. When you begin to see beyond the collective illusion, those shared beliefs, habits, and unspoken rules that most people live by, you don't just open your eyes. You disrupt something, and not just in yourself, but in others. Your clarity doesn't feel like wisdom to them. It feels like danger. The world is built on invisible agreements. We agree not to talk about certain things. We agree to play along, to keep the peace, to pretend everything is fine. But when someone steps out of that shared reality and begins to question it, everything shifts. That person becomes a mirror, reflecting things others are not ready to face. And most people would rather smash the mirror than look into it. Your awareness is no longer seen as insight. It's labeled as arrogance, or overthinking, or rebellion. You become the one who is too sensitive, or too intense, or making things complicated. Why? Because your truth threatens the comfort others have built their lives around. Take someone who starts questioning the culture of burnout in a workplace. They begin to notice how people are praised for sacrificing their health, their families, even their peace of mind. They start asking why this is normal. Suddenly, they are not just the thoughtful employee, they are the problem. Their questions create discomfort. Their refusal to go along quietly makes others uneasy, not because they are wrong, but because they are right. And people feel that truth even when they won't admit it. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about the danger of consciousness. Truth is not always welcome. It shakes the ground under people's feet. It makes them face their own compromises, their own blind spots. And many would rather hold on to the illusion than face the emotional cost of waking up. So when you begin to see clearly, prepare for resistance. It will come dressed as criticism, mockery, or even silence. It is not always personal. Often, it's a defense mechanism, a way for others to protect the story they are not yet ready to let go of. But that does not mean you are wrong. It means you have stepped outside the illusion. And once you have done that, you are no longer just a person with new eyes. You are a living disruption. Number 3. Jungian individuation is a lonely road because you dismantle every mask you've worn to belong. Jungian individuation is not a trend or a feel-good journey. It is the slow and painful process of becoming your true self, and the truth is, it is lonely. Not because you want to be alone, but because the very things that once helped you feel connected begin to fall apart. We all wear masks. We play roles to fit in, to be accepted, to feel safe. You might be the responsible one, the funny one, the peacemaker, or the quiet one. Over time, these roles become so familiar that you mistake them for your identity. But individuation forces you to ask the hard questions. Who am I really beneath all that? What part of me is genuine? And what part is just survival? This is where the pain begins. The moment you start pulling off those masks, you realize how much of your life has been shaped by fear, expectation, and habit. You might let go of the need to please others. You might stop agreeing just to keep the peace. And suddenly, the relationships that were built around those patterns begin to shift or fall away. Think of someone who has always been the one everyone leans on, the strong one, the dependable one. They decide to finally speak up about their own struggles. Maybe they say no for once. And what happens? People get uncomfortable. Some pull away. Others accuse them of changing. In truth, they are not changing. They are unmasking. This is what makes the journey so dangerous. There is a gap between letting go of who you were and discovering who you truly are. That space in between is terrifying. You might not recognize yourself, others might not either. And in that confusion, it is tempting to go back to the mask. At least there, you were seen, even if it wasn't the real you. Carl Jung warned that this process is not for the faint of heart. The old identity dies before the new one is fully born. There is no guarantee of what comes next. That is the risk, but also the reward. Because if you stay in the discomfort long enough, if you trust the breakdown, you might discover something rare. A self that is not built for applause, but built for truth. A self that belongs not to others, but to you. Number 4. The mind that perceives what others repress is often labeled delusional by those committed to unconscious denial. The mind that sees what others refuse to face is often pushed to the edge, not because it is broken, but because it makes people uncomfortable. When you notice the things everyone else works hard to ignore, you become a threat. And instead of listening to you, society may label you as unstable, overdramatic, or even delusional. People protect themselves with denial. It is a quiet form of survival. They push uncomfortable truths into the background and build lives around pretending everything is fine. The person who speaks up, who points out the cracks in the wall, becomes a disruption. They are not celebrated for their insight. They are often dismissed, or worse, pathologized. Take someone who starts seeing how deeply disconnected people are in a culture obsessed with productivity. They ask why everyone is always exhausted, why rest feels like guilt, why no one talks about loneliness. Instead of sparking honest dialogue, their questions are often met with awkward silence or forced positivity. They may hear, "You think too much," or "You're just being negative." But what they are actually doing is noticing the emotional cost of a system that rewards performance over presence. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He believed that what we repress does not disappear. It waits. It shows up in anxiety, depression, addiction, or conflict. The person who sees these patterns clearly is not mentally ill for noticing. They are awake. But in a culture that equates mental health with smiling through discomfort, being awake looks suspicious. This is where the line between sanity and conformity blurs. Just because someone is calm, agreeable, and follows the script does not mean they are grounded in truth. It may just mean they are good at suppressing it. And just because someone questions the script or struggles to function in a false system does not mean they are lost. It may mean they are seeing too much too clearly. True sanity is not the ability to fit into a sick society. It is the ability to see what is real, even when it hurts. And often, the mind that perceives what others repress is not the one that is broken. It is the one that is brave enough to look. Number 5. Seeing deeper patterns means confronting the shadow not only in yourself, but in the collective psyche. Seeing deeper patterns is not just about being insightful, it is about being exposed. When you begin to notice the hidden drives behind people's actions, the unspoken pain behind their smiles, and the quiet violence behind social norms, you're not just learning, you are feeling what most people refuse to carry. This is where the real weight begins. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we push away because they are uncomfortable, shameful, or painful. But the shadow is not just personal. There is also a collective shadow. It is the cruelty baked into systems we call normal. It is the prejudice we pretend not to see. It is the emotional numbness disguised as maturity. When you start to see this, you are not just confronting your own darkness. You are holding up a mirror to the world around you. And most people are not ready for that reflection, so they project it onto you. They might say you are too sensitive, too intense, or too negative. But what is really happening is this. You are noticing what they are working hard to ignore. You become a container for what others disown. You feel their anger, their grief, their fear, sometimes even before they do. This is not because you chose to. It is because your awareness opened a door you cannot close. Without support, without inner work, this burden can crush you. You may begin to feel heavy, disconnected, or overwhelmed. You might carry emotions that are not even yours. If you do not learn to separate what belongs to you from what belongs to the world, the weight becomes unbearable. Integration is the only way forward. That means learning how to feel the darkness without being swallowed by it. It means making space for the pain without turning it into your identity. It means being honest about what you see, but also compassionate with what others are not ready to face. The deeper you go, the more you must ground yourself. Not in other people's approval, but in your own truth. Because to walk through the collective shadow without losing yourself is not just a challenge, it is a kind of spiritual craftsmanship. It takes patience, courage, and a fierce commitment to stay awake in a world that prefers to stay asleep. Number 6. You may begin to question your own reality, not because you're wrong, but because you're isolated. When you begin to see life differently from those around you, when your truth no longer fits inside the collective script, you may start to question everything, including yourself. Not because you are wrong, but because you are alone in what you see. And that kind of isolation does not just affect your social life. It quietly begins to erode your sense of reality. This is the part no one talks about. When you start waking up to deeper truths, whether it is about the way people hide behind roles or how society numbs itself with distractions, you expect clarity. What you often get instead is confusion. You begin to ask, am I the only one noticing this? Am I being too sensitive? Am I losing it? You are not. But it feels like you are because isolation distorts everything. When everyone around you denies what you see, their silence becomes its own kind of gaslighting. And over time, you start to wonder whether your inner knowing is just imagination. This is where the psychological war begins. On one side is your gut, your intuition, your deeply felt sense that something is off. On the other side is the pressure to fit in, to agree, to stay quiet so you are not pushed further out. Every day you toggle between trusting yourself and doubting everything. It is exhausting. It wears down your confidence, your voice, your grip on what is real. Imagine someone in a family where no one ever talks about the emotional tension. Everyone smiles, keeps the peace, avoids confrontation. One person begins to feel that something is deeply wrong. The energy is heavy. Conversations feel fake. They say something. Everyone looks at them like they are being dramatic. Eventually, that person starts to wonder if they are the problem. But deep down, they know what they felt was real. They just don't have the support to hold on to it. This is why people return to the illusion, not because it is true, but because it is shared. And there is comfort in what is shared, even when it is dishonest. To stay awake in that space, to trust your reality in the face of silence, requires incredible strength. It means choosing inner truth over external approval. It means learning to hold the loneliness without folding under it. Because sometimes staying sane in an insane environment looks a lot like madness to everyone else. Number 7. Insight can feel like a curse when your inner world outgrows the language used around you. At first, you may feel excitement or even relief, like you've uncovered something real. But then comes the strange silence. You try to explain what you're seeing, but the words fall flat. People nod politely or change the subject. You're left holding something vast and important with no way to communicate it. This is the quiet cost of deeper awareness. You no longer speak the same emotional language as the people around you. You see beneath surface-level talk. You hear what isn't being said. You notice the weight behind someone's "I'm fine." You start to feel like a foreigner in your own life, because the truths you've uncovered don't fit inside everyday conversations. It's not that others are stupid or shallow. It's that they haven't been to the same psychological depths. They're still living inside the system you've started to question. Their words are built for comfort, for simplicity, for keeping things moving. Yours are trying to describe something raw, complex, maybe even sacred. Imagine someone realizing that their entire career was driven by a need for approval, not passion. That insight changes everything. They try to share it, hoping someone will understand. But the response is something like, "Well, at least you're successful, right?" The insight dies midair. Not because it isn't real, but because it doesn't match the script. What you see has no name because it hasn't been named yet. And when language fails, so does connection. You start to speak less, not out of arrogance, but out of exhaustion. The burden of translating yourself becomes too heavy. This silence can feel like isolation, but it's also a strange kind of integrity. You stop wasting words. You start protecting your truth. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious speaks in symbols, not in plain language. So when you gain real insight, it often arrives in images, feelings, or flashes of understanding that are hard to translate. That's why it feels so lonely. You're holding a truth that hasn't been given permission to exist out loud. But over time, that silence becomes something else. It becomes depth. It becomes clarity. And eventually, you stop needing others to understand in order to feel real. Because once you know what you know, it cannot be undone, even if there are no words for it yet. Number 8. Those who glimpse the unconscious often become its vessel. Those who catch even a glimpse of the unconscious often think they've found something sacred, and sometimes they have. But what they may not realize is that the unconscious doesn't just show you truth, it uses you to express it. And if you are not grounded, not fully rooted in yourself, you don't just witness the unconscious, you become it. Carl Jung warned that the unconscious is not a gentle force. It's wild, it's ancient. It doesn't speak in facts or logic. It speaks in symbols, dreams, impulses, archetypes, and emotional storms. To open yourself up to it is to invite something larger than you into your psyche. And if you don't have a strong enough center, it can take over. This is where things get dangerous. A person starts to see hidden connections everywhere. They feel chosen. They hear meanings in everything. They might believe they've been given a message for the world. But what's really happening is that the unconscious has flooded their system, and they don't know how to contain it. It is not enlightenment. It is possession. You've probably met someone like this. A person who speaks with absolute certainty about spiritual matters, who is convinced they've transcended ego, but can't tolerate disagreement or doubt. They may sound wise at first, but underneath there's chaos. Their insight is real, but it hasn't been integrated. It has taken control of them. This is what Jung meant by the danger of inflation. When the ego identifies with the unconscious, especially the archetypal or mystical aspects of it, it becomes inflated, swollen with importance. The person starts to believe they are the message, the prophet, the oracle, but they've skipped the hard work of grounding, humbling, and testing that insight in real life. And without that work, the line between spiritual awakening and mental breakdown becomes paper thin. True insight is not loud. It's not obsessed with being believed. It doesn't rush to explain or convert. It's quiet, lived, integrated. It leaves room for mystery and for being wrong. So if you glimpse the unconscious through a dream, a crisis, a sudden awakening, don't rush to speak. Don't claim to know. Sit with it. Question it. Ground yourself in the ordinary world, because the unconscious is not here to flatter you. It is here to grow you. And if you let it, it will teach you, but only if you stay human in the process. Number 9. To awaken in a sleeping world is to become a symbol of danger. To awaken in a sleeping world is not a moment of celebration. It is a quiet crisis. Suddenly you see things that others don't. You feel things more deeply. You begin to notice the masks, the distractions, the silent agreements people make just to get through the day. And in that moment, without trying, you become a threat. Not because you intend to harm anyone, not because you are loud or aggressive, but because your very presence makes others uncomfortable. You represent the thing they are trying not to feel. You mirror back what they have worked hard to forget, and no one likes being reminded that they are asleep. Imagine someone who has just left a toxic relationship. They start to recognize the same patterns: manipulation, guilt, control, in the relationships their friends are still in. They gently bring it up, hoping to help. But instead of being thanked, they're met with silence. Maybe even resentment. Not because they said something cruel, but because they saw too much. Because waking up to truth means others might have to do the same. And that's a terrifying prospect when comfort is on the line. This is what Jung understood so well. The awakened person is not just an individual with new insight. They are a living disruption, a symbol of change. And most people fear change, especially when it threatens the story they've built their identity on. So you may be met with distance, dismissal, or even hostility. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've stopped playing the game. You've stopped pretending. You've stepped outside the shared illusion. And in doing so, you've become a walking question mark in a world that demands certainty. This is the danger of consciousness. Not the kind that comes from ego or superiority, but the kind that quietly says, something isn't right here. That statement alone, even unspoken, shakes people. Because to acknowledge it means they might have to look at what they've been avoiding. The deeper truth is this: when you wake up, you don't need to convince others. You don't need to argue or defend. Your presence alone, your clarity, your refusal to numb, will speak for itself. And yes, that will make you a symbol of danger, but only to those still clinging to sleep. Number 10. The seer risks becoming narcissistic or grandiose without deep humility. The seer walks a dangerous line, not just because they see what others don't, but because no one else may validate what they see. And in that space of being misunderstood, even ignored, the ego begins to whisper, maybe I'm special. Maybe I'm the only one who gets it. That's where the real danger begins, not with the vision itself, but with what the ego does to survive the isolation that follows. Insight can be lonely. You start noticing patterns, illusions, and emotional truths that most people either can't see or won't admit. At first, you may try to share, hoping others will connect. But when you're met with confusion or dismissal, a psychological vacuum forms. No one affirms what you know to be true. No one reflects it back. And in that empty space, the ego rushes in to comfort you. It says, you're different. You're above them. You've evolved. It wraps your loneliness in superiority so you don't have to feel the sting of disconnection. And if you're not careful, you start believing it. You stop listening. You start preaching. You go from seer to guru, from witness to self-appointed prophet. This inflation is subtle. It doesn't look like arrogance at first. It looks like confidence, certainty, even leadership. But underneath, it's the same wound, the pain of not being seen. Take someone who's been through a deep spiritual awakening. They try to share their experience but feel dismissed. Instead of sitting with the pain of being alone in that truth, they begin to believe they've been chosen. They stop questioning themselves. They stop being curious. And slowly, they lose touch with reality, not because their insight wasn't real, but because their ego made it all about them. Carl Jung warned about this constantly. He knew that when the ego identifies with the contents of the unconscious, especially powerful ones like archetypes or mystical insights, it becomes inflated. And that inflation looks a lot like enlightenment on the surface, but it's brittle. It cracks under pressure. It can't hold complexity or contradiction. The antidote is humility, deep, grounded humility, the kind that remembers truth is not owned. That insight is not proof of superiority. That wisdom, if it is real, leads to service, not self-importance. To see clearly is a gift, but to stay humble in that clarity, that is the real discipline. That's what separates the seer from the narcissist. Number 11. Others may try to fix you because they cannot metabolize your difference. When you begin to live or think in ways that no longer match the norms around you, people don't always respond with curiosity. Often, they respond with discomfort. And instead of asking, why do you see things this way? Or what changed in you? They shift into repair mode, not to understand you, but to bring you back into the version of you they recognize. This isn't always obvious. It can come through concern that sounds caring but carries an edge of judgment. Are you okay? You've changed. Or why are you making everything so complicated? What they really mean is, I don't know how to relate to you anymore. Your change creates tension. And the fastest way for them to relieve that tension is to try to fix you. Bring you back to the version of you that made sense. That didn't make them question themselves. Carl Jung understood this dynamic. When someone breaks away from the collective persona, the socially acceptable mask, they don't just change themselves. They ripple out into their environment. They become an interruption, a reminder that growth is possible, but also uncomfortable. And that discomfort often makes others defensive. It's not that people are trying to be cruel. They are trying to protect something, the familiar, the known, the emotionally manageable. Your transformation, your questions, your refusal to play by the old emotional rules threatens that. Listening deeply to you would mean reconsidering their own beliefs, their own coping mechanisms, maybe even their own identity. Most people aren't ready for that. So instead of listening, they try to edit you, shape you back into someone who doesn't disturb the balance. Imagine someone who starts setting boundaries after years of being a people pleaser. They're no longer available to absorb everyone else's emotional mess. Suddenly, they're seen as cold or selfish. Friends and family urge them to go back to being yourself. But what they really mean is, go back to being easy for me to deal with. True listening takes work. It means letting go of assumptions, facing your own discomfort, and allowing another person to exist without trying to reshape them into something safer. But most people aren't taught how to do that. So when you begin to grow beyond the collective mold, expect some resistance disguised as concern. And know this, needing to be understood is human, but being misunderstood doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes it means you're evolving beyond what others are ready to see. Number 12. The more you see into the unconscious, the harder it becomes to participate in the rituals of ordinary life. The more you begin to understand the unconscious, the real forces behind people's behaviors, emotions, and patterns, the harder it is to pretend that ordinary life is enough. Things that once felt light, fun, or even comforting start to feel empty. It is not that you suddenly become antisocial or cold. It is that your awareness won't let you unsee what you now see. Take something as simple as a party. Everyone's smiling, laughing, drinking, chatting about work or vacations. But underneath you start noticing what's unspoken. The forced laughter, the anxiety masked by alcohol, the tension in someone's eyes when their partner interrupts them. You hear what people are not saying, and that noise becomes louder than the music. Suddenly, you're not at a party. You're sitting in the middle of a stage play where everyone knows their lines, but no one remembers why they're performing. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about depth. When you start working with your unconscious, your dreams, your shadow, your unresolved fears, you start noticing the same in others. You see the pain hiding behind polished answers. You see the fear dressed as confidence. You see the little games people play to keep their masks on, and once you see that, small talk doesn't feel casual anymore. It feels like a cover-up, and cover-ups are exhausting. This shift can make you feel like a stranger in your own life. You used to enjoy these moments. Now you just want to leave early or not show up at all. People may think you're withdrawing, but really, you're tuning into something deeper. You're no longer willing to fake connection. You want conversations that mean something. You want truth, even if it's awkward. You want presence, not performance. But here's the paradox. The more awake you become, the more isolated you may feel. Because most people still need those rituals to feel normal. They need the scripts, the distractions, the surface-level warmth. It helps them cope. And while that is not wrong, it makes it hard to find your place again once you've stepped outside of it. This doesn't mean you can't rejoin the world. It means you have to find new ways of being in it. Not through rejection, but through honesty. Not by forcing yourself to fit in, but by learning how to carry your depth without letting it drown you. Because awareness, if not held with care, can turn into alienation. But with balance, it becomes clarity, and with clarity, even the ordinary can begin to feel real again. Finally, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung. What happens when becoming who you truly are means seeing what others refuse to see? This is the hidden cost of insight. Most people imagine awakening as a kind of triumph, like finally unlocking life's secrets. But the truth is far less glamorous. When you begin to see through illusion, through inherited beliefs, through the emotional games people play to avoid pain, it does not make you feel wise. At first, it makes you feel alone, and sometimes even lost. Seeing what others don't means stepping outside of the familiar. It means no longer finding comfort in the same conversations, the same habits, the same roles. It means people may misread you, distance themselves from you, or try to reshape you back into someone easier to digest. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you no longer fit inside their expectations. And yet, this path, difficult as it is necessary. Because once you start seeing clearly, going back is not really an option. You can try to pretend, to play along, to wear the old masks, but they will feel heavier than they used to. They will chafe against your skin. Something inside you will quietly refuse to shrink again. The challenge is to carry your insight without losing your humanity. To stay soft in a world that may treat your depth like a threat. To learn how to walk with your truth without needing others to validate it. Because the danger of seeing what others don't is real, but so is the power of living from that place with integrity, patience, and compassion. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You are here to understand yourself deeply enough that misunderstanding no longer shakes you. That kind of clarity may isolate you, but it will also guide you. And in time, it becomes the light others didn't know they were searching for. Thank you for watching.